Okay, it's just about 2 o'clock. Let's get going. Um, Thank you all for attending. This was a kind of a fun fun webinar material to put together. It actually stemmed from a private training session that I did with a client. They wanted to know more about Geopackage, so I dove down that rabbit hole. I had used Geopackage, but they always say that one of the best ways to really learn something is to teach somebody how to use it, because you really have to dive in and understand it inside out. I don't profess to know Geopackage completely inside out, but I use it now on a daily basis. It's a great file format. So I'm going to share with you just some of the things that I do on a daily basis with it. There's a lot more, like any of these sessions that we do. There's a lot more that you could do with it. But this will be enough just to sort of get you started if you want to start dabbling with a file-based database. So a little bit about me. I'm just going to run through this. So I'm the founder and CEO of Luna Geospatial. I have been working with open source GIS since about 2007, and I consider myself an expert in QGIS, PostGIS, GeoServer, as well as a bunch of different applications. I really like using things like GDL, which we're going to talk a little bit about this. Spatial SQL is the language I love. I did a background. My background is actually in remote sensing as well as surveying. So I did a PhD at the National School of Surveying at the University of Otago in New Zealand. I studied tropical deforestation in northern Belize before I started working in the GIS sector. And I had the opportunity to work in a number of different sectors, including conservation, local government, software development, the archaeology sector. So I have a pretty good idea of what a lot of people do with GIS and sort of needs out there for these various sectors. So what do we do at Luna? Well, first thing is consulting and training. We specialize in open source GIS, and we do remote sensing. We do training. We offer support for these platforms. We also do software development. So we build custom web GIS, custom dashboards, data portals, mobile first applications, and database driven applications. And lastly, we also set up GIS servers. So if your organization is thinking of migrating to open source GIS or simply just wants to try it out to see if this is something that could work for your organization, we set those up, we manage them, we provide all the necessary training, support, backups, management that you would need. So really, if there's any of this that sounds a little interesting to you, you can always reach out to me and I'd be really happy to set up a meeting for a chat. But before we begin, let's go through an outline. So I'm going to be talking about what is Geopackage, some of the advantages of Geopackage. Then I'm going to be talking about vector data and raster data, what we can do with them, cool things we can do with symbology. And this is all going to be wrapped around with QGIS, of course, what we can do with Geopackage within QGIS. We're going to talk about Spatial SQL with the database manager. And then there's a couple of there's one plugin really that I use with Geopackage quite a bit. And disadvantages of Geopackage. I actually just moved that. So that's actually number 3 in the list. So we're going to do advantages and disadvantages at the beginning. Now, intended audience is just pretty much anybody who's interested in this sort of stuff, but really specifically anybody who hasn't really reprogrammed their brain to export to Geopackage instead of shapefile, especially for vector data, of course. But you can do a lot more with Geopackage, but it's really hard. I got to the point where I was always just, if I was exporting something, like, oh, I'm going to send it to shapefile. And then I thought, no, this is something I have to start doing because this is a great file format to store this stuff. Especially if you're exporting a bunch of different layers, it can store a bunch of layers. So why not export to a single file? And really anyone wanting to dip their toes into spatial databases without having to set up a server. The really nice thing about this is although the syntax might be a little different than PostGIS at times, or Postgres and PostGIS at times, this is a really nice way to sort of dip your toe into Spatial SQL, run a few queries within the DB manager, and all you're working on is a simple file. You don't have to have a full spatial relational database management system set up to do so. And of course, the good thing about Geopackage, which you'll see, is that anyone who shares data, and specifically I'm looking at government and non-government organizations who share a large amount of data, it's a wonderful format to share data. And you can share, if you have you know, a bunch of different layers, including raster, vector, and non-spatial data. You can share it all as one Geopackage for download. So it's really a nice thing to have. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn on my camera and I'm going to dive in and show you how this stuff works. Now, feel free to save your questions to the end. If you have any issues during the webinar, you can reach out. You'll see Amanda on the list. You can message her privately and you know, report any issues if for some reason my sound goes out or something like this and I don't realize it and I keep on talking for the next hour. Please let her know. And we'll do a little Q&A at the end. So save your questions, then drop them into the chat or drop them into the chat while we're talking. And if I do happen to peek over to my second monitor and see them, I'll try to address those questions in real time. But for the most part, I'll answer questions at the end. All right, just so we know what I'm using QGIS version 3.22 with all of these additional items on it. Okay, so big question, what is Geopackage? So I think most people have sort of heard of Geopackage. Maybe they've received something in a Geopackage format, but maybe you haven't really worked with it much. It's an OGC-compliant file format for GIS data. It's open. It's a completely open format, and it's a standards-based format. It's very lightweight. The beautiful thing about it, of course, is that it's a single file, and it's based on SQLite database container. So you can do all these, you know, SQL things that you would normally do with it in a database using this container. And with being a spatial container, you can obviously run a bunch of spatial functions as well when you're using this. And it, of course, the extension for this is the GPKG extension. Okay, so what are some advantages of using Geopackage? Well, you can store raster, vector, and non-spatial data. It's really one file to rule them all. You can just throw everything in, and it is exactly that. It's a package of geo, which is a beautiful thing. And you can store mixed geometry types, which is nice. So unlike something like shapefile, where, you know, a shapefile is going to be a polygon, a point, a line, with Geopackage, you can store a bunch of different layers. You can store your roads as your road lines, and you can store your parks, polygons, and you can store your community centers points within the same Geopackage. It obviously has cross-platform compatibility. You can use it in a variety of different programs. Today, we're going to be using it obviously in QGIS, but you can use it in the other GIS if you want. And there's a bunch of other different open source packages that can also consume Geopackage quite easily. It's often faster to load and query vector data than shapefile. This is a nice advantage of using Geopackage. And they say no file size limit, but I think the database does technically have a file limit. I don't think anybody has really explored that. But there's if you look at the SQLite specifications, there is a set kind of limit, but it's massive and you'll never reach it. And there's unlike shapefile that has that 2 GB limit. And I think that anybody working in the geospatial sector has used a shapefile and at times hit that limit and goes, oh poop, that's a problem. So it's very nice to use Geopackage in that sense, because you're really never going to hit a limit. The other thing that's really nice, and these are just some of the advantages, there's other advantages out there, more technical ones, but I love that we have full column header names. So you can really have more than 10 characters within a name. So there's no need to have some sort of abbreviation for a header that fits within 10 characters. You can easily add nice long header names like you would in a database. Now, the only tricky part about that is this, that if you ever do export a layer to a shape file, it will snip that at 10 characters, and then you will have some sort of strange header and you won't understand it once it gets converted into shapefile. Solution, don't use shapefile, use Geopackage. Okay. And the last thing, it's a perfect place for large outputs. I love this. I use this when I'm using GDL on the command line. You can create a massive contour line output that you, even if you suspect it might be over 2 gigs, you can say, no, you know what, just send it to Geopackage, and then it's going to send it directly into Geopackage, which is nice. So some disadvantages. There are security and permission issues. Well, one of the things about permissions is that there's really no permissions. If an individual has access to the file like they would any file within your file system, if you have a server, let's say with a file share, if they have read write permissions on that file, well, they can pretty much do anything they want to the file. They can delete things, change things, add features, delete features. There's no real permission. So in terms of security and permissions, if you have access to the file, you can do anything. Now, if you have read-only set on your file system, of course, then an individual might only be able to read these files. I haven't tried that. I have a feeling that it does. Geopackage does create these temp files when you're doing any writes to the database. So I'd be curious to see how that would actually function if there was only writability on the server. Haven't really played around with that, haven't needed to. But this is just something to always keep in mind, is that you can't establish the same type of rigorous, granular permissions with the Geopackage that you can with a full-fledged database. The one bucket of data is nice, but this is also a good and a bad thing at times, right? So if you're going to have, if you want to group your data within a Geopackage, you can't really do that like you would within PostGIS. So if you saw my webinar from a couple of weeks ago called Spatial SQL Isn't Scary, it's on our YouTube channel now. I was talking about how we can create different schemas for different types of layers. So I will typically add things to a schema called boundaries, and I'll throw all the boundary data for something like a municipality in there. And then there might be like a parks and rec schema, and I'll throw parks and park benches and whatever else is in a park in that schema. And it's just a nice way of organizing your data. Well, you can't really do that with Geopackage. Geopackage is the bucket where you're going to throw all your data. So the solution there is, well, maybe let's create different buckets of Geopackages for different stuff. That's great until you want to run a query between them. And that's not possible. Okay, to my knowledge. So files can be easily overwritten. I did this already, and I put this on the list because I made this mistake. I was running a GDL command, and I named the output the same as the as an existing Geopackage, and what happened was basically just overwrote the entire Geopackage that already had some data in there. Now there are ways, of course, to append data within the Geopackage, but I didn't put any of those flags on, and things got overwritten, and I was sad. So this can happen, but you can also easily you can easily just simply delete from within your file system and can be gone. So the same care you would take with any file on your file system, you have to take with something like Geopackage. Lastly, Geopackage is simply not PostGIS and Postgres. Now, what I mean by that is that there's going to be a lot of functions that you're going to use within PostGIS or Postgres functions as well that you'll simply try to do, and it just doesn't exist within SQLite, or the syntax is completely different. So you're dealing with two of those things, right? Maybe the function does exist, but the actual syntax to do it is a little bit different than it would be in PostGIS. So these are things to know. Maybe you don't have to cast it like you would within PostGIS. If you have, a numeric field and it's supposed to be a decimal, and you're going to cast it to decimal or cast it to numeric from decimal, maybe it'll just run with whatever it is. So those are things that will trip you up a little bit as you're starting to do some of the spatial SQL. So the best is to obviously go back to the SQLite documentation, go back to the Geopackage documentation, and rely on the syntax there to run different types of functions. And I'll show you an example of this with the trigger function. And if you compare it to the Spatial SQL Isn't Scary trigger function that we did, that's actually on GitHub as well, you'll see the difference. All right, so, and I mentioned this already, is that the syntax does differ from something like Postgres. Okay, let's dive into this, Geopackage and QGIS. All right, so some of the fun things that you do, you can create a Geopackage in QGIS. Very easy, you can go through the main menu and go QGIS, layer, create, layer, new Geopackage layer, boom, and you'll get this pop up. You can go through the browser panel and you could right click on Geopackage and press create database. Third, you can use the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-N, and you will create a new Geopackage. So if we dive into QGIS right now, I have a whole whack of layers ready right here for London and City of London, Ontario, Canada, as well as Windsor, Ontario, and I have some DEMs and some rasters and things like this. So I already have one connection made here, but I want to create a new one. So I'm going to create a new one here, and I'm going to call it webinar. And I can go through and I can create. Now, the thing about creating a new GeoPackage that's different than something like using a relational database management system is that when you're creating a database in Postgres, you just create the database. It's an empty database and it lives there and it has nothing in it. But when you create a GeoPackage, you actually have to create a layer to go in it. So oftentimes it's like, okay, well, I don't really want to create just some random layer just so I now have a GeoPackage. So a good starting point is to like export to that GeoPackage, and I'll show you momentarily how to do that. But this is one way. If you are going to be creating a new layer, you could create this point layer, and let's put it in the project CRS, which is EPSG 26917, and I'll be converting all layers to that as I load them into this GeoPackage, and that's UTM zone 17 north. And if we're going to create this, we can add a new field. Let's just say we want to add area. I'm actually going to call this proposed park. Let me just make sure that's the right one. Yeah, parks. We'll use this later when I'm going to show you how we're going to do trigger functions in here. So we have an area field, and we're going to have that be a decimal number. We're going to add that to here, and we're going to create now this webinar GeoPackage. And in webinar GeoPackage, now we have this proposed park layer. So I've created a GeoPackage and I've created a layer at the same time. Now, the other thing you can do is you can come in here and go to create layer, new GeoPackage layer. Again, we get the same pop-up here, and I already told you we can do Control-Shift-N and GeoServer pops up. Okay, so we've created our I said GeoServer, I meant GeoPackage. We've created our GeoPackage and we are ready to go. Okay, what about if we want to connect to an existing GeoPackage? Well, we can connect from the browser panel by right-clicking and going GeoServer, new connect. I keep on saying GeoServer, GeoPackage to new connection, and we can also connect via the database manager. Now, if you don't use database manager, you don't have it opened up right now, you just right-click, go in here, and there is a database toolbar to add. When you add that toolbar, it will add this little database manager icon, and when you open it up, you can access the various database connections that you have. And in this case, we have two. We have this London DEM Contours one that I've created, which I'll show you in a little bit. And we have this proposed park table that lives within the webinar.gpkg file. And we can see this has nothing in it, but we can also see the structure of the table. So the database manager is kind of a nice way of visualizing how things work and the structure of your data within the database. Okay, so, oh yeah, sorry. And connecting, if you do want to connect to a new one, and I do have another one here. If I wanted to create a new connection, I just click on new connection. This is really the easiest way of doing it. And I have this one called GeoPackage webinar, which I was creating when I was sort of testing out a bunch of different things for this, and that exists right here. And then when you want to get rid of it, one thing that's dangerous here is that we have a remove and a delete. When we have an existing one, you don't want to delete unless you actually want to delete that GeoPackage. See how easily you can destroy data and be sad. But you just want to remove that connection. Now that doesn't delete the data. If we go back in here, we see that within this folder that I have, my GeoPackage webinar GeoPackage is still there and everything's still safe. So I just removed the connection within QGIS to that GeoPackage. Within the database manager, it's the same thing. You come up here, you go new connection, you find the GeoPackage that you want to connect to, and you can add it to your connections. All right, so add vector data to GeoPackage. All right, so how can we do this? There's a bunch of different ways. We can export a layer to GeoPackage from the layer panel. This is a great way of doing it, especially if you want to change the CRS on load. I recommend it. You can drag and drop the layer into Geopackage, but one of the things I will point out with this, when you do this, this will not change the CRS on load. It will just take whatever CRS you have and it just load it into the database. And we can import the layers using the DB manager. So let's do that first. So if we just click on webinar.geopackage, we can import a layer by import, and we can take a layer, let's just say London Roads, and London Roads is going to be imported into here. Now London Roads is already, let me just make sure. If we go into London Roads, it is already an EPSG 26917, so we're good to go. So I can import. Oops. Sorry. Import London Roads. London Roads comes in. We can change the name of it. We can change the primary key or anything. And this is where we can change the target. If we did want to change the CRS when we're loading into the Geopackage, we can do that here, but we'll just keep this as it is. But we can also do cool things in here, like replace the destination table if it exists. So if you're going to be just updating an existing table within the Geopackage, you can use this. And this is the exact same functionality we do when we're loading stuff within PostGIS. So I press OK on this. This layer will take a little bit to load. And now we have our roads layer, and we can see everything about it. And we can look at the table, and it will load a big fat table, which I usually recommend don't doing in here because it's just going to sit and load. Okay, so here we go. We have the multi-line string for the geometry and so on. Okay, so now if we come over here and expand, we have this now, this London Roads layer. So we can add that layer now to our map. Added it to a group. And now we have this, and this is, we can see if we go into the properties of this layer, we can see that this is coming from the Geopackage called webinar. Okay, so we've done one now. We can probably take the shape file away, and we've loaded now a vector layer into the database, and we can load it back into our project. Now, it's pretty fast, it's pretty zippy. It's just like working with any file-based system within the GIS. You can zoom in, zoom out quite quickly without any lag. The other way you can do is drag and drop. So one of the things I can do is I can go to here, and I think there's a couple of them that are in that one. No, maybe there's one. Okay, so actually this is a larger one. So if I turn these on, I don't think I want to do this one as a drag and drop. I want to show you one that's not going to take too long. Okay, here's one, the London planning districts. So the other thing you can do here is you can drag it. And when you drag it over the webinar Geopackage, it's probably hard to see on your screen, but there is a little blue plus sign that shows up. And that just means that it's going to be dropped in and it's done. So the planning districts are now within the database, within the Geopackage as well. So if I want to add those to the map, now we have our planning districts and we have our roads added to the map, and this is coming directly from Geopackage. So yeah, obviously very fast to load it in. So we can do that with the rest of the layers that are in the correct coordinate reference system if we want, but we'll probably load the rest in manually. Okay, whichever ones we can. So we can remove this one. Planning districts, we loaded already. And so on. Okay, so that's loading vector data, fairly simple process. The other thing that the other way that we can do it that I was showing you is we can take this and we can go to export, save features as. We're going to save it into an existing Geopackage called webinars, but we don't want this. The only thing about saving it this way is that we don't want to call it webinar. It'll automatically give it the name webinar, which is the name of the Geopackage. We actually have to go in and go, we want it to be called the London Tree Inventory, and that's going to be saved as an EPSG 26917, and we're happy, and we can press OK. And then we can see the status here. This is obviously the largest layer that I'm loading into the Geopackage today, but it gives you an idea of just the process, especially for larger layers. The nice thing about doing it this way is that there's progress. When you're doing it in the database manager, you sort of press OK and you kind of sit there and wait. And hope that nothing jumps out at you and tells you that something has gone wrong. This, at least you see a progress, and then of course it'll hang on 99 for a while. So now this layer has been added. The only thing annoying is that when it adds it here, it adds it as webinar dash dash dash, which I don't feel like that. I could rename it, but it's just as easy to remove it. And then coming in, we can often have to refresh in order to see the new layers that you've added. Now we have this new tree inventory that comes from the database, so we can remove this as well. Okay, so bunch of layers loaded, bunch of things coming from the Geopackage. That's vector data in and of itself. I showed you just how to export, drag and drop, and import from the database manager, which is a really good way of doing it as well. Okay, how can we manage the vector data? You've seen this already. We can manage in the browser panel. So if we come into the browser panel, we can do things like, let's say for this planning districts, we can manage, we can rename, we can delete, we can export the layer. So if you did want to export it to shapefile format or CSV or whatever you really want, you can do that from here. You don't actually have to load it into your project before you do it. If you want to execute some SQL on this, you can do that as well. If you want to add layer to a project, you can do that. You can look at the layer properties. So pretty much that's what you can do. Within the database manager, you can do a little bit more. So in the database manager, you can do things like add, modify, delete columns or indexes. You can export the layers. You can empty the table. Try not to do that unless you really want to. Oops, sorry, wrong database. So from here, we can go in and let's say we had a London roads, we could go in and we could actually edit the table. And if we wanted to add a new column called test, we could do that. We could make it be an integer and we can press OK. And now we have a new field called test and it's an integer and we've done that. Now, if we want to go ahead and say, you know what, that wasn't a good idea. Let's delete this new column that we created. We can delete that new column and it's gone. So really easy to work around with, a lot easier than a lot of other files that you're going to create. It's easy to manage here too. You can delete the table. You can create another table if you want from within here as well. So if you wanted to create it. Now, the thing about if you haven't used the DB manager for another database before, the database you're on, so now I've expanded webinar, is the one where stuff is going to be created. So if you then go into the table and say create table, it might not be obvious where it's going to be created, but because you've expanded this one database here, webinar, where whatever you create is going to be created directly into that database. Okay, what about raster data? This can be fun. So pretty much the same thing. You can export the layer to Geopackage from the layer panel. This is kind of my recommended approach. I was also fiddling around with drag and drop. It does work, but I had some weird things happen, and I don't know if it's a feature or a bug, but just some of the naming of the rasters were a little funky when I did that. So I found it was much better to export to Geopackage if you have an existing raster. Now you can't do it from here. So if I wanted to import, notice all the inputs are only the vector data. I can only import vector data within the DB manager. I know, it's sad. But I also have these cool layers here. So if we turn some of these on, I have an NDVI for the city of London that I created from Sentinel data. So I can export this. So I can go File, Export, Save As. I want it to go to a Geopackage. I'm going to select the Geopackage I want, which is the webinar one. And I don't want to call it webinar. I want to call it London NDVI. I want it to be in 26917 and I can press OK on that. And that's going to go and it's already loaded. So now when I expand this, now I have this, well, for some reason, now it did call it webinar, which is not what I wanted, unless you saw that I didn't change it, but whichever way it's here. And this can be loaded onto the map. So now this comes directly from the database. Good. Okay. We can also do this with, so we've done the NDVI. Oh yeah, we do have the London NDVI. Interesting. Interesting that it calls it webinar in here. Not quite sure why that happens, but it makes me sad. The other thing I have is a DEM. So this DEM can also be loaded into the same Geopackage. Save as Geopackage. We're going to go into webinar. We're not going to call it webinar. We are going to call it London DEM. And we are going to press. Okay, so now the DM is being inserted into the GeoPackage. Hang on 100 just to make you a little nervous. There we go. And now if we refresh, you're going to find that we now have, oh, wow, now it's actually changed the names. Love it. So now we have the London DEM and the London NDVI in the GeoPackage. So we're good to go. All right. So what have we learned? Super easy to load your data. So now basically what I have is I have a pretty nifty little database here that has a whole bunch of layers for London, Ontario. I have a bunch of rasters and they're all sitting happily within a single GeoPackage that I could now share with somebody if I wanted to. And the other thing you can do is you can also import layers via the GDL command line interface. That's kind of cool. So if you're creating anything new, you can actually just have the output be a GeoPackage. My only big caution there is just make sure you're not going to overwrite the whole GeoPackage, or else that'll be something that will probably make you sad. Okay, so what about mosaics? We can actually mosaic rasters to GeoPackage, which is kind of fun. We can build virtual rasters with a bunch of different layers, and then we can send those to that VRT, so a virtual raster file, and we can actually send that VRT to the GeoPackage, and it'll be a nicely mosaicked bunch of files. So the first step is just create mosaics using GDL's build VRT or build virtual raster. You can do this on the command line if you want by using the command here. You can also just create, this is creating a temp file, which is why the path is so long. But if you just want to create the VRT, it's very easy to do. Alternatively, you can use the build virtual raster, which is what I'll do for you today. And then you're just going to drag the VRT into the GeoPackage and you're done. It's really that easy. And this is a time where I'm going to show you how I actually drag some of this stuff. So let's turn this on. So in here, I have a bunch of different tiles. They're in a different location. So these tiles don't look great because they're obviously not mosaic together. So we are going to build the VRT. So we're going to build a virtual raster here using the build virtual raster tool. We have to select which tiles we want to load into here. We have these 1 kilometer tiles for this digital elevation model. Press OK. We do not want to place each in a separate band. We just want to mosaic everything all together. And a temporary file is fine because I don't really need this VRT for anything else. Now, if I run this, now I have this virtual raster here. So I'm just going to rename it here in the hope that this is what it's going to be called when I bring it into my GeoPackage. So GeoPackage is here. Virtual mosaic is right here, and you can see it all looks nice now. Everything's seamless. And we drag it over to the GeoPackage. It gets added, and we have this DEM now loaded. So let me just remove this DEM. I can turn this off, and now we can load this DEM into here. And really nice, it's not showing up. Oh, oh, sorry, that's why. Okay, so now it's been loaded into the GeoPackage. I just didn't have the group on. Just realized that. I'm sure somebody was screaming at the screen as I was doing that. So now this is seamless, and this is loaded directly into the GeoPackage. What's cool about this is that you can actually use GDL with this too. So you can call this this raster that now lives within the GeoPackage, and you can do analysis with it with GDL on the command line. You can use this obviously within QGIS for whatever analysis you want to do, but it lives within a GeoPackage. So that's kind of fun. What about overviews? Well, one of the things I've done is when I've tinkered is that it's best to use the build overviews in parentheses pyramids tool I found to do this. I found that when I was doing it with within the layer properties, I wasn't getting good results, and it would just kind of throw a little bit of an error. So I was going to talk to somebody on the QGIS team about that at some point. But this works fine. You can also run this using the on the GDL command line interface. So it's fairly easy. So if I'm just going to be building pyramids, build overviews, pyramids, we can select this DEM, and I am selecting the right one. Yes, I am. And I can state whatever I want. If I'm just going to do a few different levels, 2, 4, 8, 16, whatever, that's fine. I can run this, and this will run within the database. And now if I remove this, just to make sure, I'll show you that when I add this, it's going to be just a little zippier. Now, of course, if you're using a larger data set like aerial photos or something that cover quite a large area, this will be a lot faster when you zoom in and out. I did this, I think, with the, not the, I think within the London DEM. Yeah, see, it's a little sluggish to load. So if we come in here and actually London DEM and do the same thing, at least 2, 4, 8, 16. We could add more levels to this. Okay. Close. Okay, so now this is going to be a lot more zippy to load. Ooh, it's doing funky stuff. I'm going to remove this. I swear this worked fine before. The DM. Now it's giving me an error of some sort. It worked before. I can prove it. I can prove it. Watch, guy. Look, I can have a new connection. See, this is why it's like one of those cooking shows. You know, you show people how to do something, but then you have the other one like just waiting. This is it. London DM. So this one's the zippy one that where the overviews worked. I don't know, something. So it's a lot faster to load and a lot faster to zoom in and out. What happened with the other one? I don't know. We'll just pretend that never happened. Okay, so add non-spatial tables. This is a handy little thing as well. I was working with some census data, and it was just easy just to add it to the table, and then you can join it to the spatial data. These tables are really easy. You just load it into the you literally drag the Excel file or whatever you have directly into QGIS, and then you just drag it directly into the Geopackage, and it'll just create a table, and then you can run your analysis from there. You can also import the layer or the table, sorry, to Geopackage via the DB manager. So you really have 3 options there: the export, drag, and drop, or the import layer. Exporting super easy. I already showed you some of this, is that you can export via the layers panel. You can export via the browser panel. You can also export via the DB manager. And just to refresh your memory, if there's a layer that you have here, oh, look at that. I really just mucked that up, didn't I, people? Any layer. All right, building overviews totally borked my database, but you know what? I have another one right here, so I'm not worried. This is how we run, people. Okay, so if you want to export any of these, you just have to right click, export to file, whatever you want, save it to a GeoTIFF, so you can export out of the database. Okay, so you can save QGIS projects also to Geopackage, which is kind of nice. So what I can do right now, and what I'm going to do is just fix some of my stuff right here. I'm going to go save on this, new. And I did this already. I have this London, Ontario base map that I can load, which is 1 layer. Isn't that nice? It's actually layers for Windsor, Ontario. But we can load the London boundary, zoom into that. Look at that. Now we have a file. So how do we do this? How do we actually save a QGIS file directly into Geopackage? It's pretty easy. We just go to File, Save to, Geopackage, select your connection. I'm not going to select the webinar one because that one is borked. I'm going to call this the base map 2. And then oftentimes you'll have to refresh in order to see it. Right here. So this new QGIS project file is now saved within the database. So kind of nice. So you could literally hand somebody all the data the project file and anything attached to that project file. So the nice things about adding a project is that you can also add some bonus things to that too, right? So if you create any custom tools using the graphical modeler and save those tools to the project, and then save that project to the Geopackage, all that is saved for the individual. If you save spatial bookmarks to the project, which are really handy to use, you can save those as well to the project, and the project is saved to Geopackage. So you are really handing somebody a complete package of data for a project. It's a really nice thing to do. It's a great way to make friends. Okay, default symbology. This is kind of fun, and this is a very sort of post-GIS-y thing that we can do with Geopackage. You can save default symbology to the source DB via the layer properties. That's pretty easy. And you can also save additional styles to the source database. So if we're going to do this, let's zoom back into these community centers. Believe me, they're community centers. I'm just going to add a base map on here so we can see things in context. Okay, so we have a bunch of points on our map. For these community centers, there is a default style applied to this layer. I know this because if I was to remove this layer from the database, and if I was to come back to it, and I was going to load the Windsor community centers, it's loading with the same style. It's this purple sort of dot. But I did something else too, is that I created an additional one, but I'm going to create a third one now, sorry. So we have this purple one, and let's say now we want to have a blue one, dot, and I press OK, and I say, okay, now the dots are blue. That's great, but I want to save this wonderful symbology that I worked so hard to create. And you can say save style. And where do we want to save? We don't want to save it as a QML or an SLD file. We want to save it within the database, and it says Geopackage. We want to call this blue dots and press OK. So now we have blue dots saved within the database. What if we want to go back to some of those other styles that we have? We can go to load style from the database, and we have red dots. Okay, so now our dots are red, which is fun. And then we can go back to say, you know what, the red dots were fun, but you know what's even better? The default style. And the default style is always named after the layer itself. So we have Windsor Community Center, so that's gonna be our default style. So we're happy. So not only can we share the project file that has a symbology applied to all the layers, but we can also save additional styles. I often do this with things like roads. Let's say I'll have a very elaborate road layer that has labels and everything, but sometimes you just want roads as kind of a base map. You don't really want to show the labels. You want the symbology maybe just to be like a light gray, semi-transparent, because you're going to be showing something else on the map. Well, I'll save this sort of like muted road layer symbology into a database, and then I can call it. I can bring it back whenever I want. I can just swap out the styles. So saving those symbologies is a really handy aspect here, and it's really nice that you can do this just with a file-based database as opposed to having to do this with a much more elaborate relational database management system. I'm used to doing this stuff in PostGIS, so when I started doing this, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. You can do that with Geopackage. All right, additional symbologies. I talked about that already. Is just saving those additional ones. What about Spatial SQL? We already know from the last webinar on Spatial SQL isn't scary that this isn't scary. And this is stuff that's actually kind of cool that we can run. So we can run Spatial SQL queries using the database manager. And I'll show you just a bit how we can do that. So we're not going to be in here because this is broken. And we're going to go into here, and I think I still have those layers loaded, so this should work. Okay, so this is just a basic join that we're running. And the whole purpose of running this join is that we want to join the Windsor community centers here. I can zoom in on through this. The Windsor community centers, and we want to join them to the Windsor land parcels. And this is literally the exact same query I used in Spatial SQL. Isn't scary. And I'm doing the exact same thing in here. And the spatial function I'm using is the st-intersects. So I'm intersecting the geometries of both these layers. Layer A is the Windsor Community Centers. Layer B is the Windsor land parcels. And I'm using a left join because I want to keep only the stuff from the Windsor Community Centers. But what do I want to take from the land parcels? I want to take this roll fix number, which is just the roll number. So then we end up with this. And we end up with a layer. Now, one of the limits I found with Geopackage is that you can't save this to like a new table really easily. Now I may be wrong. I may be wrong on this, but I've tried to create a table with SQL and I had sort of errors and things wrong. Now I'm I need to do a deep dive into this because there is apparently a method to create things, but it's not as easy as in something with like Postgres and PostGIS, where if I wanted to turn this into a new table, I could just go create table temp as, and this would create a new table. Now I think if I do this, it's not actually going to work. Do it. Okay, I'll do it. So it does this, but I don't think it actually shows up in the list. So see, it doesn't actually create a spatial table because I think within SQLite, it actually does a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes to actually create the table. And somebody who knows SQLite a little bit more than me would probably understand exactly what's going on there. But I haven't done this enough with Geopackage to figure it out, and really I just didn't care. If I wanted to create a new table, what I would probably do is I would probably just execute this and then load it in as a new layer like this, and then we could easily just take this new layer, which now if we look at it has this role fix applied to it because it's just a query layer now, and then I would export this query layer into the database. So you can just drag and drop. I'm sorry, I see the question pops up from Jean-Louis right now. I think you can create dynamic layers. I didn't prepare that for this one because as I was going through a lot of the SQL stuff, I thought this might be a cool other webinar to actually do something a little more heavy on GDL and a little more heavy on running on SQL. But yeah, I think you can create views as well. But again, I haven't tinkered with it enough. And again, I don't know if it works within. It might work within SQLite, but not within Geopackage itself. So to be determined by me at some point. But feel free to fiddle around with, if you're familiar with that database package, fiddle around, see if it works. Okay. All right, the other cool thing is that you can create trigger functions. The syntax is a little bit different here when we're creating these, but you can do things like this, where you're just going to automatically calculate the area of polygons when you're creating them on the map. And it's going to run a trigger function like this. You can create this right from within. You can create this right from within the database manager within QGIS and just run this function, and all of a sudden then you have a trigger function applied to a layer. So it's kind of nice in that we have this proposed parks layer now that I've created, and I can come in and I can digitize whatever I want. Let's say we're going to put a park right here and knock down all those buildings. Sorry, people. And press OK, press save, turn off editing, identify, and we can see now that we have the area calculated in square meters. So that obviously you can get a little more elaborate with this, just like I did within the Spatial SQL isn't scary. You can do quite a bit with trigger functions, and you can make the database kind of work for you as you're going through this. One of the things I was tinkering with is you can view all the database objects by using something like the DB browser for SQLite. I would say you can go through and mess around with there, but there's a really good chance that you're going to break something. So my caution to you is just be careful if you're going to modify anything from within this. If you're just running a bunch of queries off the database, you can do that quite easily within within a platform like that. Any real client that you can use for SQLite will work. If you connect to the database, you can just sort of do stuff in there. You can also modify things. I think you can modify the trigger function, things like that quite easily. So it's similar to using something like pgadmin for Postgres. GDL is great. I was able to run GDL on the DEM for London, Ontario, and I did a 1 meter intervals for these topo lines. And I actually, if you look at the command that we use, so we use GDL Contour, and we're going to name our field elev for elevation. And the neat thing now is that I'm actually taking the London DEM from the Geopackage. So GPKG : and then the name of the Geopackage dot Geopackage, and then another colon, and that's the layer. So Geopackage, name of the Geopackage, name of the layer within Geopackage is my input, and my output is London DEM contours dot Geopackage, and the interval is 1 meter. So what's nice about that is that I was then able to create a new contour line. Now this wasn't huge, so when we zoom into here, this wasn't massive, but it's still and it produced in a couple of minutes or so. It's roughly the same size as the shapefile that was created. So I did it both. I did it as a shapefile and I did it as a Geopackage, and the size was quite similar. I read in a bunch of different places that Geopackage is supposed to be a lot smaller. Maybe there's something else that we can do to make it smaller, but for this layer itself, it was small. But the thing is, when I ran this, I didn't know how large it was going to be. I didn't know if I was going to go over that 2 gig limit. Maybe if I did the interval something like 0.5 meters or 0.25 meters or 10 centimeter contours, which anybody who knows London, Ontario would be kind of laughing because London is not very hilly place. It's quite flat. But we could do so. If we did 10 centimeter contours, we might end up going over that 2 meter, go over that 2 gigabyte max for the file size. So nice to know, at least though, when you're running this, you're not going to hit that 2 gigs and then lose all the time that you spent producing some data. You can just export directly into Geopackage. So just remember that if you're ever doing anything on the command line, you can do that. Now, little plug. I'm thinking in June, I think that if this is something that people are interested in, is of doing another sort of quick webinar just on using some of the GDL tools, kind of to get you started. And a lot of these webinars are, the idea for them really comes from stuff that I've learned when I was getting started with this, and kind of things that I would have wanted to learn right away at the beginning, a few gotchas. And if we can learn those at the beginning, that would be really good. Yes, good. Emma wants it. It's going to happen now. Thanks, Emma. So the other tool that I really love, Discovery plugin. I mentioned this in my plugins webinar. If you don't use the Discovery plugin, because you don't have a connection to a relational database management system, today, people, is your lucky day. You can actually connect to a Geopackage using this Discovery plugin. So if you have a layer, and here this example shows you is that when you click the configuration button, and that's right here, we can just configure it and we can connect to whatever database we want. We can call it just, I don't know, what do we want to call it? Community centers, just CC. We can go to the, oh, we're not going to do that. Sorry, not that. Geopackage. We can switch to Geopackage. So there's really 3 different databases that it supports: Postgres, Microsoft SQL Server, and Geopackage. If we click Geopackage, now we have access we want to actually search for the file. So we can find the one that we're looking for. And then it's like, which table do you want? And we want to do Windsor Community Centers. And which field do we want? We want to search the center field, and we want to display the center field, and press OK. And then now we can actually use this to do a search and zoom, which is kind of nice. Second. Be good if I knew a name of Gino. Here we go. So if we want to find this place, oops, not Gina, Gino. Now we can zoom, do a quick search and zoom into it. And the only thing that's slowing down this progress now is OSM loading, or, oh, sorry, OpenStreetMap. So this works really nicely. I like this because you can actually create a bunch of different searches. So right now I'm searching CC, which is community centers, but if you wanted to search for parcels, you could have another one in this drop down here. You can easily come in and just press the plus. And now we've created a new one, and we're going to do another Geopackage, and we're going to call it number 2. And you can search the same thing. And you can search multiple Geopackages. Which is really helpful. So if you have a bunch sitting on your system, one of them has the parcel data, one of them has the hydrology data, one of them has this or that. If this is the way you're dividing things up, you can now use this discovery tool. The other thing I really like about this, I say this all the time when I'm pitching this, no, I don't own stock in the discovery tool one bit, but it's free. I'm joking. Is that it's really nice because you don't need to have the layer loaded. So you're just searching the layer. It's just over there. It's going to pull back. It's going to pull the geometry. It's going to zoom in. It's going to put a little red thing on the map. So it just pulls the geometry from the database, loads it, and then it disappears eventually, and you see the thing. Now, if you don't have it loaded on the map, of course, it doesn't make much sense to you once that little red icon disappears. But it's a really handy tool to use. It makes me happy. That's my Geopackage talk, people. I hope you enjoyed it. I sort of ran through a bunch of things, and I think that there's a few things that I really want to get into a little bit more, including working with tiled layers within Geopackage to see how that works. The other thing is serving Geopackage through something like GeoServer. I think that would be like a phase 2 of, okay, how does that work? Again, and making that switch from shape files and just retraining your brain to say, hey, this would be nice if we could put everything into one package, is really helpful. So here's just my one little pitch. Next week, this is exciting. We're doing our first introduction to PostGIS. So this is some paid training that we're doing. So you can show up for that. Let me know. Try to register before Wednesday if that's going to happen. I will say that we have a bunch of really nice people around the world now signed up. So, and I will sort of tweak the time to make it better for everyone. I do have one person from Perth who's committed to staying up from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. for this course. So if anybody's in that part of the world, any of my friends in New Zealand or Australia who would like to sign up, we can definitely nudge the time a bit to make it a little bit more palpable for you. But try to register before Wednesday of next week. Reach out to me if you have any questions. We're also going to do Advanced QGIS 1 in May. This is going to be a lot of fun. Sign up for that. We're going to go through some more advanced analysis like network analysis and some more remote sensing stuff. If you want to find out about the webinars coming up, there's some cool stuff coming up in May. We're going to be doing a webinar. May is going to be all about mobile data collection. I'm really excited for that. So we're actually going to have the team from Lutra Consulting coming in and chatting about their merging maps. So that's going to be in May. Watch for that. If you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get notifications. I don't spam. I believe quite strongly in that. I send maybe 1 or 2 emails to my list a month. One is the newsletter, and I might just send a reminder about the courses that we do somewhere around mid-month. So don't worry about that. If you're worried about spam, we try to keep it to a minimum. We respect our list. Upcoming webinars, you can also keep your eye on the webpage, lunargeo.com/webinars. There will be some more added for May and June coming up. There's going to be some good stuff. I think that if there's motivation for the GDL, I think I might dive into that. And I want to do some stuff on GeoServer too eventually, give you sort of a crash course of what GeoServer is all about. So with questions, I think I answered one of them. Feel free to drop anything you have. Ooh, there's more messages coming in. Okay, are QGIS layout saved to Geopackage? Yes. So everything that's saved within a project, everything that's saved within a project is going to then be saved to Geopackage if you save that project to Geopackage. Good question. Raster compression. Yes. Keith, that's an interesting thing. I was thinking the exact same thing when I was going through this, and I found it really frustrating when I was even just trying to create overviews within the properties. It threw up this error, and I need to ask somebody about this after, but it threw up an error that basically said you need permission to do this. I'm like, that's so weird. I don't need permission to create overviews for a file on my system. So I need to look into that. And as for compressions, I don't know, but I suspect, and I'm just guessing here, I suspect everything that you would do within GDL. So if you want lossy or lossless compression, I suspect you'd be able to do it there. But yes, I'm with you in the sense that when you export to Geopackage, it's not that clear how the data are going to be compressed, because yes, of course, if you're going to be doing any analysis on this, you really do want lossless compression on the data. So how about a big fat question mark for that question? But that's something that we definitely have to tinker a little bit more with to figure out. You drag the VRT that was created as a temp file. Did that cause the source data to be copied into the GeoPackage? No, when is that what I did to Bork the database? I don't think that, no, I think I did the export. I'm not sure what I did. When I dragged that over, when I did it and it worked. So the database that I showed you after that was like, well, it's there. That DEM got created. I just dragged it in. And I was experimenting too. I'm like, wonder what I do with the VRT. So I actually renamed the source data just to see. I'm like, is it trying to call source data? Like, is it just loading the VRT, or is it actually mosaicing the whole thing, like a GDL translate going on behind the scenes? No, it actually mosaics everything together into a single file, because I changed the name of the source data, like the folder name. I just tried to change it. I'm like, okay, well, this would break it if it was a VRT working from within the GeoPackage. So that's not how it works. So it actually loads the actual file. So yes, Keith, dive in. It's really fun to work with, and I'm still tinkering. I think you can see that, some of the stuff I'm kind of like still have questions, and I'm just asking myself, I'm like, I think this is how you do this. But it's fun to play with, and it's definitely nice if in the best use case. I think one of the things, like when I was reading up on Geopackage put together, people are talking like, what's the best use case for this? Honestly, sharing data with somebody is the best use case. So if you're going to be saying, okay, you know what, I'm going to put together a little base map, and we're going to be showing you, bird habitat throughout London, Ontario. We have a bunch of points on a map with a bunch of data. Just giving them a bunch of shape files and a bunch of style files is kind of like saying to somebody, hey, I really want a cake, and you handing them all the ingredients. So with Geopackage, you can just put everything all together, which is nice. Yeah, so I that's one of the things I like most about it. So definitely tinker with it a little bit more. Okay, is there a feature comparison between Geopackage and file geodatabase? No, I haven't looked into that myself, but Bernie, that's a really good question. How about you do that and let us know? That would be helpful. So Bernie is going to be giving us a presentation next week. No, I'm just joking. Yeah, Emma, that's actually a really good thing too, is that it is nice to have those styles being centralized. Now, again, the caveat here is that this is not a relational database management system, right? So this is something that you don't have that granular control over something. So let's say you want it to be purple and somebody else wants it to be red. That other person could just change it to red, save it as default, and now the new default is red. So you don't have that type of control over, you don't have those control over those different tables where the styles are saved within the database. Anybody can really change it if they have access to the data, but definitely, if you're a very small organization, you're just in a shapefile environment, this is definitely something that is really handy to use. So with that, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. And we shall meet again. Watch for the upcoming webinars. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks, everyone.